Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gary Morgan. With me, as always, my good friend, Jim Stamm. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. Today is not my fault. The technical difficulties are not going to be blamed on me. And so maybe it's somebody else that's on screen with us, Gary.
I love how Yark threw you under the bus right away.
Of course.
There's even evidence right in the chat. There it is. Damn it, Jim. Immediately.
Right. Yeah.
And hey, we do have a history. But we're welcoming back to the show a returning guest here, Dave McBride. He's the host of one of my favorite podcasts. That's kind of how we became friends. And we talk Buccos a lot. We ran into him at Pirates Fest because he made the trek out from, I believe, Jersey, correct?
Correct.
Yep. So all the way out from Jersey in a snowstorm, and we're getting another one now. I mean, I know the milk and bread is getting low out there at the Giant Eagle.
So it's gonna be a war zone. I'll have to stop there, and it's gonna be awful.
So welcome to the show, Dave McBride. How you doing, brother?
Good. Thank you guys for having me on again. This is always so much fun to talk to Pirates here. So
it's gonna be good, man. We got a good topic today too. I threw out a question to everybody and just something to get us talking. It was really for our next show. I want you to give us your top 3 returning Pirates who will deliver more in 2024. And then because I have to be difficult, I want you to give me the ones that are going to give us less too, because that's the way this stuff usually progresses. You know, I think a lot of what we are watching right now is frustration with rookies. You know, we're considering these pitchers like Quinn Priester and Luis Ortiz and even Rowanzi Contreras to a degree dead in the water because they performed badly last year. And that is just not typically how pitchers progress. You know, I think you have a lot of bad and you have a lot of good. So, Jim, back to the topic we talked about last week, where we were a little bit like, how can the team execs be saying we're going to be competing for this stuff? Because we're just not seeing it in the roster. If it's going to happen, it's going to come from youth getting there, taking a step. So I thought, let's make that the topic this week. Who's going to take that step?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you saw this, but it was like the chief baseball operations guy for the Red Sox. I put out a quote that he had about some of the things he talked about in that market. And it was almost like word for word what you would hear from Ben Sherrington, which was like, internally, this is where the improvement's going to have to come from. And so it was just kind of fitting that, that's obviously what the Pirates are banking on, whether right or wrong, that's what they're going to do. Right. So I just thought that was an interesting little side note to, you could almost interchange those names and it would be the exact same thing.
Yeah, like we've made friends, Dave, with this guy, Ed Hand. He runs a couple podcasts about the Red Sox over in Boston. Jim's been on his show. I've been on his show. You know, we talk on Twitter a lot. We find it fascinating that their fan base sounds almost exactly like the Pirates. Almost exactly. And just to us, it's mind-blowing because what we've been dealing with for 40 years, and I know they had the curse, but that's been broken and all, right?
Yeah, but it'll never leave them. I mean, that was their entire identity as a fan base, was that there was a bigger brother in the league who spent all the money, and that's the reason why we never won anything. And that's just never going to leave their DNA.
Right, and you've got Yankee any more wrong. You've got Yankee in you, so yeah,
absolutely. I have old school Yankee in me. And this is the way the Red Sox were. I told every one of them when they beat us in the went to the World Series, you're going to have nothing to complain about anymore because you got all the money in the world. You got all the ability to keep up with the Yanks. And when you lose, you just lose. It's just like everybody else. You just lost. Like there's no excuse.
Yeah, it's funny. I know we didn't plan on talking about this, but it's really
that's the best kind of show.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. Like if you look around, and I encourage Pirate fans to do this. Like just jump in threads and read other fan bases and what's going on. Like Cardinals fans are getting ready to jump off a cliff. Red Sox fans, Yankees fans, and we're going through it here. And we're going through it here in this off season, right? With the inactivity aspect of things. But Gary, it's kind of like it's kind of widespread right now. Nobody seems real happy with where they're at. There's only a couple fan bases I think that you can say, like Braves, the Dodgers. Everybody else is kind of just in this like, woe is me. The sky is falling. It's just I don't know that I've ever seen it quite to this extent from a lot of fan bases.
We've never seen it. I mean, guys, we've never seen anything like the Shohei Ohtani thing. Nothing. Yeah. I mean, this was remarkable how just insane that money is. And I think even the Yankees know now that the money is finite. I mean, it's not infinite. They don't have all the money in the world. The Steinbrenner family is not nearly as rich as that group of people who own that Dodgers team.
Yeah, they started cracking at the last CBA, though. So I'm not shocked that the Steinbrenners feel that way. I mean, they kind of sided with what the traditional small markets last time. So did Boston. So, yep. I think it's going to be an ongoing topic, and we'll worry about that a little bit later. But the point of bringing up the Boston thing I thought that was interesting, Jim, was people always say they want the truth until they get it. That is a lot of this plan. And I think a lot of it has to be. We talked about improving to the point where we would think like that would line up with what a division winner looks like to us, right?
Right.
That's the words they're using, the goals they have, the aim they have. So we want to see that reflected in the roster. And then I go through the roster and I'm like, how could I turn this into that by still accomplishing what I know has to be accomplished? They've got to work Henry Davis in behind the dish. That may cause losses. They've got to figure out second base internally with all the options they have. They can't stack somebody on top of that. It's got to come from a kid, right?
It certainly appears that way. I mean, they have some options, but nothing's surefire.
The outfield, I'd be happy with filling it, if only because I'm not super stoked about any of the prospects that are coming. Right now, at least nobody's pushed their way into like making me think they have to get a shot right now. So I'd be fine with upgrading that a little bit. And first base, I think they could do better because, again, they don't have anything coming. But even so, that doesn't make it a division winner to me. And to me, winning this season is coming out of it knowing I've got a starting rotation going into 2025 already. So that has to be kids again. Dave, I think you're muted, brother.
No, I'm not.
You're not. Okay.
I'm just sitting down listening. It's funny, this is the way it has to be. There's not going to be money for free agent pitching. There's not going to be money for a free agent 5-year deal on an outfielder. People like that are not coming here. It's just it's a non-starter with the ownership. It's just not happening. I know it's happened in the past, and you guys have told me that a bunch of times. It's just not happening here. I mean, if guys like Solometo and Skeens and Bubba Chandler and Quinn Priester and Roansy Contreras and these guys don't hit, then it's 1-year veteran deals to get you through to the next round of those guys.
Yeah,
and that's the way it works and that's the way it works for Arizona, for Tampa. Go down the list of teams that have been successful with that.
I think that's what we've seen traditionally. I think there was a little bit of a hope that maybe it would be a little bit different. I honestly think Ben Cherington, right or wrong, he makes statements that lead you to believe it could be different if he chose to be. So whether it actually could be or not, he says things like we've put out offers on multi-year deals and things like that. So to say that you've put out those offers, well, you're giving us the expectations. So, I mean, you have to have both sides of that coin.
Yeah, maybe you should stop doing that.
Well, speaking of, there's a lot of things that I think that all team execs can stop doing, and it would be pretty cool. But let's take a quick break and come back and actually start answering the question we asked, huh?
Yeah, sorry about that.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, welcome back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Gary, Jim, and our buddy Dave with us. He made the trek all the way from New Jersey, and I felt like this was the best reward for that. I know you drove all that way. You might as well jump on a podcast and start spewing your Pirates knowledge to all the fans out there.
Can I just say something about that whole Pirate Fest thing? I couldn't believe it. I mean,
Was that your first one day?
Yep. A few years back, I turned into a Pirate fan. As we know, I'm not a young man, so I spent a long time rooting for another team until they broke my patience and all that stuff, and left. We talked about this. Left baseball altogether, and then came back in the form of a Pirates fan. And I've been all in ever since. And I never attended one of these things. And being from this area and from this city that I'm in, the New York area, something like that would never happen here. I mean, never happen. And the sense of sort of like community in a club, you guys have that. And big teams, great. I know they're great to root for big teams. The Yankees, the Mets, it's great. But they don't have that sense of community. It's a product. It's something you go and purchase to go and see. You're no more part of the community as you are, when you go to a Broadway show or when you go to a concert or when you do something like that. But you guys have something out there that's very different. I mean, 20,000 people getting into this thing, thing for free. Kid took Mitch Keller to left field, for God's sake. I mean, that doesn't happen in New York's, in those kind of things. So it made me feel like I'm glad I did this. I'm glad we're doing this. I'm happy.
When you're close to something, I think maybe it's harder to appreciate. Like I know, like maybe, Milwaukee does them, like Tampa does them. So I've seen them. Boston did one a few years ago that didn't go very well. So but
no,
let's get to some answering.
It's a fair point though. Like there is a personableness to it that you don't get in larger markets, and you even get that at PNC Park. Truthfully,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus, Ben took Brian Reynolds to school on Madden. He absolutely did.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Oh,
it was.
So
he
cool.
He loved it. This will tell you. I keep going off script here, but this will tell you the mindset of kids when they're there. Do you know what Ben was the happiest that he got? He got all the pierogies autographs from the calendar.
Oh, there you go.
Out of all the things. So let's just remember, as we bitch and moan about things, man, kids enjoy it. It's worth it.
My kid loved it. Absolutely loved it. And we loved it too. It was a great time. So anyway, I don't want to go off.
Brandon Lee is starting out with his top 3 for returning and doing well. And that's the one that most people wanted to answer. No. We did get answers for the less, but obviously that's not going to be the larger portion of the show. You're fans. You're not going to root for anyone to do bad. And that is the way it comes across, even if you're just trying to be pragmatic. So we will talk about it, but the top 3 for Brandon here are Sawinski, Davis, and Piguero. Good choices because, boy, if all 3 of those click, then a lot of good things happen, right? I said earlier, Jim, that the way we would handle it is we would read the lists and we'll read the comments that came in and everything. But when names come up that we had on our lists, let's go ahead and interject with what we thought. And I personally have 2 on here. So I'll just do Jack Sawinski. I think that's the one I'll start with. I just wrote about Jack, actually. Just looking at some of his numbers and some of his trends. And, man, I think this kid's been a lot better than even the optimists are giving him credit for. I really do. I think we could be in for something pretty special here, like that we're kind of glazing over while we drool about O'Neil Cruz coming back. We already have a 30-plus home run hitter, I think, in the lineup. Yeah, I expect big things from Jack this year. I really do. The only concern I have, Jim, is that some of the adjustments he made late in the season to start hitting lefties sacrificed a lot of what makes him dangerous. So I'd like to just see that he can do that without going full on Colin Moran and flopping everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he was doing it to survive, right? Against lefties. And that's all part of the process of like the adjustments, right? And trying to figure out what you can do to still carry some weight when you haven't been at all in that situation. This is how I look at Jack Sawinski. Jack keeps improving across the board, and he's doing it in a lot of areas. So what that tells me is guys that are able to make adjustments at the major league level typically are the ones that are going to end up being someone that have good careers. Like that's the problem. Guys get to the majors and they don't have any answers, right? They don't have a way to adjust any further, and then that's it. Well, Jack has shown the ability in a lot of different areas to be able to make some adjustments and make some strides in areas. So until he shows otherwise that he can't do it and he's maxed out in those areas, then I had him in this category because so far he's shown exactly the ability to do that. And that's why I have him here. I think he's going to take another step forward.
Dave, what about you? Do you have Jack on yours?
I did not have Jack on mine, although he was in consideration. He was in the finalist level. It's much easier to predict these than ones to go backwards.
Well, we're fans. The whole damn team's on
I know. But, right. But I mean, Jack. To add to what Jim's saying, Jack seems like an easy kid to coach. He's got a great attitude. He seems to play the game the right way. He seems to be a great teammate. He's got all those things. So he's going to be given as many opportunities as he possibly can to succeed. And people are going to, I think the Pirates are going to invest time in him simply because of those things, because of what he could be at the end of the day. And the fact that, he will work his way to that. I know that sounds like a cliche, but some ball players don't.
Well, and one more note on Jack from me, and then I'll let you pick your next one from the list that you saw. Jack Sawinski, to me, there's one pitch in particular that I think if he learns to do damage on, oh my goodness. If he starts swinging at that fastball out and up over the plate instead of like trying to take it for a ball, he is going to murder that short porch in left field at PNC Park. I hope somebody is in his head because that's 15 easy home runs for that kid if he just starts reaching out for that ball.
That's a tough spot for a lefty, right? I mean, that's a tough spot for a lefty. Lefties like them down and in, and they grow up that way. So
yeah, but that's what makes a difference. So who did you have from that list there that popped up?
Henry Davis.
Davis.
I don't see how you couldn't put him on here. I mean, he came up, he played well enough, but there's so much room for improvement with the talent that this guy has, and that was sort of how I took this challenge that you put out here was, kind of thinking about it a little analytically is not the right word because that makes you think of analytics, but thinking of it in the way of how much room they actually have to improve and whether or not they're going to make that big step. And I think of all the guys with just bucket loads of talent, there's a lot of talent in Henry Davis. And again, he's another one of these guys that the organization loves. And the coaches love, and he's willing to do a lot of things. He's willing to do whatever it takes, and I think that gets a long way for a young kid to be given the opportunity to play as much as he can. Boy, he's got some pop in that bat too. And like you're saying, he's right-handed, so maybe that doesn't help him as much in PNC as it would if he were left-handed. And we got to see what his catching is like.
It will when he gets into it, because that kid is not. That kid's not going to get 2 years into his career without putting a dent in that new scoreboard. I'm just saying.
Right.
He can really get into it when he does.
And he seems to handle the bat situationally better. At least he certainly did in the minors. And I like that about him. I think that he's not just a raw power hitter like some of these other guys who we're talking about. So I like him coming up. Can he catch? I love when people online decide for us that they know that he can or can't catch. No one knows. Like only the organization knows. And the people I've talked into the organization say to me, yes, he absolutely can catch.
I think Henry
got some things to learn.
I think Henry could bomb out at catcher I don't think he
Could.
will, but I think he could bomb out at catcher and still take a step forward this year, if
Absolutely.
only because he can hit. He did not hit last year, just not the way he can.
Right.
And I think it was a pretty poor representation of what he is as a bat, Jim. I think actually his performance has us underwhelmed by what we can even expect from that aspect of him. But the hand injuries were real. That stuff is very real as far as just grip goes on a bat. And I don't know that we got to see the true Henry Davis.
Gary, it's exactly where I was going to go with Henry Davis is, like I'm pretty bullish on Henry this year. And I don't know that I expected him to have the struggles that he did last year. But I didn't have super high hopes that he would come out and just, be Adley Rushman type. Henry is a talented guy, but he's a talented grinder, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like he's going to grind his way through things until he figures it out. But once he does, I think he'll be just fine. I'll say this, I'm not a big predictions guy. I don't like to do that, but
I mean, maybe you didn't get last year's record right.
Yeah, well, I'll leave that to the experts. But I do look at Henry, and I think if he has 500 at bats this year, I think Henry Davis hits 20 home runs and drives in 70 runs. I think he'd grind his way to that if he had to.
I'll say this too about the defense, because we always are going to talk about defense for a lot of these kids. I think that's going to be a theme throughout. O'Neil Cruz, it's going to come up, and somebody's mentioned him as that improvement this year too. And we'll get to that, but the defense is constantly going to come up, and all I can really say is if the bats play, you just aren't going to care as much. You really aren't. You're never going to be like totally satisfied with it. But if Jack Sawinski, for instance, plays center field and hits 35 home runs this year, you ain't going to complain about his arm. I'm just telling you, you won't. So, there's a lot like that I think kind of goes away. If O'Neil Cruz makes 18 errors, but he hits 35 home runs and 260, you're going to be happy. You're not going to worry all that much. You're going to remember when it lost that game to the Reds, and you're going to get mad. But it's not going to be the end of the world. The bats play. That's what the team needs built on, and everything else needs built up.
Yeah, I mean, collectively, you'll notice defensively if they have some problems popping up around the diamond, and they certainly could. But I agree with you individually, man. If somebody is hitting, especially in today's game, if you're judging that from like how we used to watch baseball even 10 or 15 years ago, teams will live with it. They will. And it's not just the Pirates that would do that. They'll take defense that is just maybe even slightly below average if you can put the ball out of the ballpark. They just will.
Yeah, or they'll prioritize defense at a position if all their other offensive positions are fortified.
Right.
Maybe that's when you can afford to play an Alika Williams or something,
Right.
All right. Shannon Gregory says, gotta be Cruz, and because of Cruz, Reynolds. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it because Cruz, everybody brought up. I would say he was 90% of these entries. And why wouldn't he be? Right. In fact, some people knew it themselves and wrote, that ain't fair. I'm not even going to say him, but I would have,
Yeah, I did not include him. I thought
Right.
it was no offense. I just
that said, let's do it justice because we talk about this team not improving and not as much as we think they should or whatever. But O'Neil Cruz, man, that's a huge get back. That is a huge get back. We don't know what he is. That's the scariest thing. I don't know what he is, Jim. I don't know. Is he a shortstop? I think he's gonna show us this year he's at least good enough to hold it down. Is he a power hitter? I think that's undeniable. Is he going to steal 40 bases like Acuna? Is he going to back off on the base paths? Is he going to hit for average too? I don't know. What is O'Neil Cruz going to be? Where is he going to be in this lineup? Are they going to bat him leadoff? Are they going to hit him
Yeah.
clean up?
Dave, go ahead. What do you? I mean, where are you?
I mean, I was going to put him on the list, but then I didn't, basically because it was too easy. Because
you were cheating.
I mean, you're talking about somebody improving from last year. How could you improve? How could you not improve? When
he can certainly play more games, Dave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just statistically alone, the kid's gonna improve. He's finally going to get a chance to play every day, which what we were hoping for, and show us what he can do. I can only make him better. So it's it's an easy answer, but it's also probably the easiest and the most correct answer. I mean, he's the guy that has the most tools, has the most physical ability, has the most potential in my mind to be a huge player in this league. I mean, when you stand next to the guy, it's like he's intimidating, and I'm a big dude. I'm not a small guy, so this guy's got everything you need. And yeah, does he have some holes in his defensive game? Sure, whatever. I mean, like you said, man, the bat plays, and there's so much in this bat, and man, I hope that ankle is good because
it's funny. When you talk about trying to project things with guys, I could sit here and tell you O'Neil Cruz is going to hit 19 home runs and hit 260. I could probably also sit here and tell you he's going to hit 36 and hit 275 and drive in 90 and steal 30 bases. It's such a wide window with this guy and wide range because we haven't seen it that what does 500 600 at bats look like for him? I think you could be it's a big gap where he can be in there.
Now take Shannon's other part there where he's talking about relating it back to Reynolds. I think that's very interesting because we talk about Reynolds a lot as almost like this static figure. But this might be the first time he really gets protection in a lineup. And I mean, like, a lot of protection, not just one guy who's swinging it hot right now.
And that's something like, I think like people like to attribute protection in lineups to one other guy, maybe a lot. Like, one guy and it fixes. Like
not with Derek Shelton as their coach. They'll have a different guy every night. So
yeah. But like to me, like protection in a lineup comes from whenever you get more dudes in your lineup all the way through. That tends to have like the overarching effect that I think when you talk protection.
Right.
One guy, I don't know. You can pitch around O'Neil Cruz a ton if you want. Brian Reynolds, to me, Brian Reynolds is just an extremely consistent guy. I don't expect him to have some monster year. I think Brian Reynolds is Brian Reynolds, and he's going to have a year that's very indicative of what he normally has.
I mean, as long as he doesn't get his wife pregnant, I'm happy. I think he's going to probably score a lot of runs this year if he doesn't, because every time he does, he struggles. So let's hope that he has a nice, good year and they have enough children. But he's honestly killing it though. I think towards the end of the year he started to catch his stride and it was working from both sides of the plate again. And that was what was missing, I think, for him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a natural right-handed hitter, and I think a lot of people forget that. And somehow that's the side he struggles from the most whenever it's going to go bad. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and it may be just as not facing that left-handers enough that it's just kind of gets out of practice with it. But when his timing is off with the right-handed, it screws everything up for the left-handed too, because he's so regimented, you know.
Lefties are weird, man. That ball's coming at you weird. That's a weird.
It didn't hurt Ben against Keller, but
it's a weird.
That was all
thing.
coaching.
Lefties pitching coming at. Oh man, that's easy for me to hear if you're not used to it and you're doing both. Switching back to looking at a lefty, when you're a right-handed hitter, isn't the easiest thing in the world.
I think if Brian Reynolds just does what Brian Reynolds does, that's all I want from him. I don't need Brian Reynolds to be.
Yeah.
I need him to be all-star caliber, and I think he's got that ability most years to be in that category.
think he does too. Let's do one more here, and then we will take another break. A couple new names here from Wilbert Matthews on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it is now. He says a couple of his really caught me by surprise. Triolo, which, okay, I could see that. I didn't have him on my list. Open to thoughts if either of you have him.
No.
Barucki, which, boy, I feel like Barucki's a backslide candidate. That is the best he's ever done last year.
I have Barucki on my less list.
Not to jump the shark here, but I do too.
I mean, like, no offense to him, like, if he's going to do better than a 0.743 whip, then I need to see what that looks like. The guy absolutely shocked me, and I just can't imagine that he can repeat what he did.
Yark has Priester, Sawinski, and Davis. So we've done Sawinski and Davis already. Priester, boy, it'd be hard for him not to. 7 ERA last year. That said, I have it on pretty good authority. I've heard it multiple times now. Calling Quinn up last year was not exactly like plan number one.
No.
So calling him up, asking him to throw more innings than I think they planned on having him throw last year. I know for a fact he hadn't gotten the change up where they wanted it yet. And I just think everything was just a mess with him because of all that. He was in the middle of like stretching out his extension too a little bit. Like, I just don't think they planned on using him as heavily as they had to last year. Maybe I'm taking it too easy on Quinn, but I think last year he kind of did the team more of a favor than he did himself.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you just never know. Like, see, the part that's interesting about all this is, especially when you talk about young guys, is we don't know what's going up here in the melon, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know how Quinn Priester handled that. It was rough. And the guys that are able to kind of flush that, and remember these are young dudes, like, that have never had this kind of an issue. Up until probably these points in their careers.
Not that consistently anyway. He'd been knocked around before, but he'd never been knocked around in the big leagues. That's a different feeling.
Yeah.
With even, people will make fun of attendance here, but like, even if you got 12, 14,000 people booing you, like, that hurts. You know what I mean? Like, so I get that. I think he'll bounce back stronger though.
I don't know what to expect from him. I'm hoping for the best. I don't know.
I hope he doesn't have to. I hope he's up here because they want him up here next time. Like, I hope the next time he's up here, it's because they think he's legitimately ready, not because they need somebody to do it. And I think that's kind of, if I'm looking forward to anything in 2024, I think that's probably it more than almost anything. Because aside from catcher and first base, I think they legitimately are going to have major league caliber players right there in the minors they can call from. And they haven't had that before. Not like this.
Right.
Priester was on my list.
Okay.
Again, looking at it from the perspective of improving from last year to this year, and being a young pitcher and somebody, just like you said, is exactly the case, Gary. He was not supposed to be up when he came up. That was sort of a emergency situation, and then they stuck with it, I think for good reasons. And I think they felt he was improving by the end of the year, that his starts his last one wasn't good, but that his starts in September got a little bit better. He was pitching a little bit better. He had more control. He was doing some things that they liked. So you definitely feel like, just from how much room there is for him to improve, there is a lot there with Quinn Priester.
Yeah,
and
because
there's a lot of talent there.
Those lessons that you learn at the major league level, they have to be learned. There's no way to do this without learning those lessons and taking those beatings and dealing with what you get. For every Spencer Strider, there's 50 guys like Quinn Priester that come up and struggle and then go back down and learn and come back up and get another shot. And maybe if they're lucky, they get a third, and that's the one they stick. this stuff is really, really like that. And this year, there's some of you already that want to skip ahead to Jared Jones, for instance. I personally feel probably got more arm talent than almost anybody but Paul Skeens in the system. So I want to see him too. But you're not going to jump all these other guys. Like you're going to give them a couple chances to kind of get their feet wet a little bit.
Right.
So I'm glad to see Priester made some people's lists. We should take another break, Jim, and then come back, and then we can just free for all have fun, right?
Yeah, let's get in some of those lessers.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll turn the page. I don't want to because the first name just irritated me right now that I just saw.
Oh no.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
All right, welcome back to the Pirates Fan Forum here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Boy, there's some cool stuff going on with this show, Jim. I mean, we got some pretty cool guests coming up. We got some sponsorship news coming up here pretty soon. We're
Yes,
going to
we
have
do.
merchandise for you here pretty soon. So lots of good stuff happening on the old Pirates Fan Forum.
That's right.
And that's all because of yins. I guess people like Dave who don't say yins too, but you know, that's what it's all about. So thank you so much for the support, everybody, because it is being noticed and the show is growing and we appreciate it. So
yeah, I'm appreciative of as many people that we reach, and this is the result of it, and hopefully you guys enjoy what's coming up.
Yeah, and I said all that because the first thing I'm going to say is from our buddy James Littleton, who's not afraid ever to say who's going to do worse next year. He's very good at that, actually.
I think he looks forward to it.
He tells me every time we go golfing that I'm going to do worse, and he's usually right. So here's who he put on his list in order: Kutch, Hayes, and then Endy. Too easy because Endy won't be here. So he copped out on Endy.
Oh, James, that's weak.
But Kutch and Hayes. Now, Kutch, okay, that's low-hanging fruit with the age. But I would say, like, if he's healthier, I don't know that I would expect less. You know what I mean? It's hard to do this subject. You don't want to expect less, but I think it's cool to look at the guys that you maybe think might be trending in the wrong direction. That's all.
Well, I would counter that with Kutch just saying it. This is why I would say that. He was banged up last year. So, I mean, like or if it's just health, I can say, okay, well, maybe you're just saying, like, at this point, his health, he's that's going to be an issue from here on out in some way, shape, or form. But I will say that I think Kutch has kind of reinvented himself just a little bit these last couple years, and what he's able to do and how he's able to kind of impact games. And you know, he's still an on base percentage machine, and I think he's really leaned into that. And so if the bat speed maybe isn't exactly what it was at one point, I think he can replicate what he did last year if he's healthy.
Yeah. I mean, Dave, I'd like to say that the injury thing won't happen again, but I think a lot of the reason that you see these numbers tend to go down for people of a certain age in Major League Baseball is because injuries do catch up. Father Time usually does catch up, and there is usually something bugging you a little bit that, you know, you're not 100% as you used to be after every game. That said, I kind of think the Pirates are going to ask a little less of him this year. I kind of feel like they're going to not expect him to play 140 games, maybe.
Yeah, and also you're not talking to, like you said, he was injured a lot of last year. Talking about a guy who had 43 RBIs for the season, maybe 10 to 12 homers, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a healthy guy, even at his age, isn't going to regress to the point where that becomes the best he can do. I mean, I think if he gets the at-bats that he was on he was projected for before he started getting hurt.
Yeah.
I think I have a hard time. I think I agree with Jim. I have a hard time seeing that bar is too high to clear. I mean, I think even if he's reasonably healthy for the year, 250 something and 12 homers and 40 something RBIs.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Kutch is a professional hitter. He'll contribute when he can, and I again, it's low hanging fruit because of his age for sure.
Hey,
Jim, the other thing I'd say too about his age is these guys are pretty self-aware. Like,
Yeah,
you saw how Cam Hayward talked the other day after the football game. Like there's real reflection in his voice about like whether he was going to be able to physically do this again. You could tell it's weighing on him. He don't want to say what he's saying,
right?
But he's self-aware. He knows Father Time, as Ryan Lytle here says, Father Time is undefeated. Well, Kutch is pretty openly saying, hey, my plan right now is 2 more years. And so that's not something that comes from a guy that feels like he's on his last limb. He's not going to Jake Taylor it down to first base on a bunt. You know what I mean?
No, Kutch is in. I mean, for guys that are his age, I would say he's a young 37 for most guys that age. I mean, would you rather be Kutch at 37 or Rowdy Tellez right now at 28? Who by the way is on my list of less.
Well, as Rowdy Tellez currently around 46, I can tell you it's not fun. So.
But yeah, so like the other thing I will mention is like if an elbow to a hitter, I mean, aside from like wrist, the elbow, man, like that is like so intricate and important. And if you're not healthy in one of those areas and you're trying to hit major league pitching and the way guys are throwing these days, I would submit the fact that he was as productive as he was with a bad elbow. It is actually kind of I have some hope that maybe if he's healthier he can look just as good.
I do too. Yeah.
All right, you want some more lesses? Okay, sure. Here's one. I'm not going to even try to pronounce this name. It's just a bunch of gobbledygook letters. Okay. So I don't know what it is with a period. Okay. So anyways, it's on X. Yay. Majinski, Triolo, and Delay. Delay, I could see less, especially if Henry takes off for sure.
If that's not less out of the player, that's less out of his role. That's somebody Wally Pippin you there,
I think Delay is probably always a risk to do less because I think it's surprising every time he does what he does. His base hits are those kind of base hits that are, well, they're what Jordy Mercer used to get. Jordy Mercer would just like get those singles that just right over the shortstop's head and fell right in front of the left fielder. And he just had a knack for doing it at the right time. And it was almost enough to make you go, what, that Jordy Mercer, he's a damn good hitter.
Yeah.
But in reality, maybe not so much if you really, really start digging into the numbers. So I guess Delay is an easy one to go ahead and pick. Triolo, the BABIP we talked about, just tells me I think people are going to feel like he regressed. But to me, he's still at that age where I'm kind of looking more for signs of things that he's growing with a little bit as opposed. I don't even know if I know what kind of hitter he is yet. I think they're going to try to squeeze more power out of him this year, and that could screw up a lot of his average and on base percentage stuff. And that's because I think they might be thinking about trying to stick him at a corner position. And if they do that, they're going to want a little more pop. So
there's a lot of, because of what you just said is there's a lot of unknowns with Jared Triolo. I happen to think he could be better, but just in different ways. So, for me, he's a guy that, until we get a fuller sample size and see what he's attempting to accomplish, we just don't know. We just don't know.
Graves got a couple good ones here that I think will probably resonate with some people. And I think these are probably going to be for playing time reasons too, most likely. Joshua Palacios and Jose Hernandez. And I think that makes a lot of sense because Hernandez he might have to start in AAA just because he has options, Jim.
Right.
And Palacios, I don't know if he'll make this team. Just looking at it right now, Olivares, I think, probably gets a shot first. And I don't know what they do there. So, yeah, I could see him probably taking a step back too. Plus, as exciting as he was and as great as some of those moments were, his OPS was only 620 something, Jim. Like, it just isn't a thing, right? He's almost 30.
Yeah. He's a great guy for a clubhouse. I think we
Great
all,
guy.
Yeah.
we all
Record
know
him
that.
saying, raise the Jolly Roger, have him on the
Wonderful
broadcast team. I don't care. But
yeah. Even with some of his heroics, his numbers were bad overall. And then you're going to ask him to duplicate maybe that same kind of role again. That's really hard in baseball to do that. So I hope the best for him. I don't know that I can fully expect anything other than maybe he was just a nice little story for a year where he got an opportunity and did something with it. So,
Charlie Murphy agrees with Graves there on Palacios. Now we have Joe and Moretta. So Connor Joe, man, that's an interesting one because he's, I think, been trending up. I actually think Joe is a kind of understated good trade chip. Like, I think he's got a couple years of control. He can handle a lot of different positions, and if you don't think that you have to have him, I think he might be part of a package that could bring you back something you need. That's a nice piece for a playoff team to maybe want to have on their bench that can just fill in a lot of roles for you, handle the bat pretty well. And if you're trying to shed what was a fifth starter that has now become a sixth or seventh because you picked something else up, that might be the type of guy that you would want along with a prospect.
Dave, what do you think about Connor Joe?
He wasn't on my list. He would certainly be considered. I had Palacios on my list for those exact same reasons you guys are talking about. I think Connor Joe, another wonderful guy. I mean, he seems like a hard worker and a great guy to have around the clubhouse. And I think, as you're saying, he's a major leaguer, and he can fill a lot of roles in a lot of places. He's a great bench guy. This team just isn't in the. I think this team just isn't in the position yet to carry great bench guys. They've got to have the starters first, and we've got to find those spots, and we've got to fill those spots, and we got to figure that out. Is that Connor Joe? I mean, maybe, like you're saying, it's trending up. You're not going to ask a lot out of him. Not really a lot of options at first base. Not a lot of options in right field. There's a place for him here. But at that point, he's kind of a stopgap.
Yeah, and what's your end game with him? I guess you take him to Arb again.
Yeah, that's what I think. So, right. So I think he's easily the first guy. The reason why I would say he's a regression candidate is because he's the first guy to kind of lose opportunities should younger players perform in those positions, and hit better in those positions. I just don't know if that's going to happen this year. That's why I didn't put him on the list.
And Jim, I know Connor Joe's grown on you. We talked about that a little bit last week, and I really think he has me too. There's no denying he's still, bottom 5 of the roster, right? Bottom 3 of the roster. He's one of those guys that he's going to make it because he can do a couple things, and we need that.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that Connor Joe can still have a really good role on this team. It might not just be as often.
Sure.
And that's how I look at Connor Joe at this point. I think, ideally, he played first base better than I thought he would.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Outfield, okay. Second base isn't ideal, but, maybe there's something in there a little bit more that he can use to fill in on certain days. I think he's still important. I think I don't think you can afford to go into your bench with a lot of guys that just can't flat out hit. I think he's shown he can hit a little bit. I think he's a good
stopgap. I think he's a good stopgap to the eventuality that you have developed a few bench guys, and then you can move on from them, because I think that's where some of these guys are going to settle in. Like Nick Gonzalez could eventually be a bench guy.
Yeah.
Or, he could win second base too. It's too early to be saying one way or the other, but you're going to have guys settle into that role as well. And that's when you start making guys like Joe expendable. Just like years ago when the Cardinals decided they were okay getting rid of Colton Wong and Descalvo, get rid of those guys that were just like your fringe bench type players and replace them with, new guys you've cultivated that kind of didn't sprout all the way. One more here from Charlie Murphy, and it is Dauri Moreta. Boy, I could see that too, because I like Dauri, but man, when he's not controlling that fastball, he's pretty useless. Honestly, he's got to have that fastball, and he's got to have that weird two-seamer that breaks the wrong way. It's super strange. It's a unicorn pitch. It gets people out. They can't touch it. But without the fastball, they just don't swing at it. So I could see him regressing, or I could see him taking off if he gets a handle of it. He's very much a swing player for me here.
Problem with Moreta is like he's so one pitch dependent, and so like when you get a guy like that who it decides to come and go whether he has that pitch working or not, and now you're trying to give him innings that matter. He can be very good at the stranding runners thing.
Yeah, Josh calls it a backward slider. I call it a screwball.
Yeah. But is it there enough to trust him? I don't know. I don't know if it's repeatable. I could see why someone might put him on that list.
Yeah.
Let me go back real quick on Connor Joe real quick.
Well, it's your show too, Jim. You don't have to ask my permission.
All right. So here's the deal. This is a guy last year that I think people might be overlooking just how good he was in his role. He had 31 doubles. His on-base percentage was .340. He slugged .421 and had an OPS of .760. Like those are numbers those aren't 11 homers, 42 RBIs. He did it in 400 at bats. There's a place for a guy like that on a lot of major league ball clubs. There really is. Like I've gone from someone who's kind of poo-pooed him to kind of defending him. But man, folks, you can do a lot worse than Connor Joe. I
think he's been a good acquisition, actually. Low-key good acquisition. And the pitcher they traded for him, I really liked too, Garcia. I was really into him, actually, and he has done nothing with the Colorado system since being moved. So, hey, so far, win, no real loss. And I think they got a decent player that has kind of helped raise the overall talent level of the team. So, we got a great comment from Seth Johnson we got to read, because this dude took his time and wrote. So, I do want to read some of his stuff here. But I don't want to circle back to the good, so let's start with less. He says Alika Williams is an easy pick for him. May not make the team out of spring, plays good defense, but the bat won't play enough to warrant him being on the MLB roster, in my opinion. I think that's what we've seen. So he could always catch fire in AAA and get some attention again. That's how he, came to be in the first place. Right. So Bednar. Bednar's on my list for regression, so
me too.
I hate saying it, but as I mentioned above, Majinski may end up pushing Bednar out of the way by the end of the year. I think I said that as a hot take last week, which was, something I obviously agree with. A guy that has shown that he runs out of steam in the second half of the year consistently over his career. I don't think that's something that's just going to improve magically. So I also think that the usage might be a little different this year. And the reason I think that is because this might be the first year I think we're entering the season with Derek Shelton having 3 guys he has used and feels good about using as a closer.
Right.
Well, I think that's why I put Bednar on my list. I mean, he not so much that I think he gets tired at the end of the season. He's done. This is consistent. This is not a. This wasn't an aberration. He does it every year. So in order to improve that, you have to cut down on his usage. I mean, you just have to. And as the guy gets older and the arm gets more time into it, you're just going to have to do that. Now, that may not be this year, but it could be. And then therefore, there you got a regression candidate, an obvious one for somebody who, who we've seen him regress in the course of seasons.
And, did we all get all of our names out there, Jim, through this process, or is there anybody left on your list that we missed? I have one that didn't come up, and that's Piguero. I have on the more list.
On the more list, okay. Yeah. I had Majinski on my more list.
Okay.
I think he's really ready to step into a different type of role. I think all the peripherals there that I looked at looked good. On my less list, I did have Ke'Bryan Hayes.
Do you? Okay.
I do. And what I want people to understand when I say that is that if the expectation is that you are now going to see the Ke'Bryan Hayes fully and completely that you saw the last 2 or 3 months, I think that's too high. Yeah, I think you're going to see him settle down somewhere in the middle of like that super hot streak that he was on, and he carried that for a while, and then him bottoming out where he was there for far too long, that made some people even give up on him. And I would just caution people to expect fully what you just saw at the end of last year. I think if you can even get 80% of that with his defense, he's still going to be very good. I put him on the list because I think people are expecting fully that. I don't know that I can say that.
I think that the reason that I don't put him in my regression is because I think he'll do that, like you say, a little more than the final third of the season. I think that will kind of raise his overall boat a little bit, I think. So I think that's why I have him on the upswing. That said, I didn't officially put him on either of my lists.
Yeah,
I kind of just took him for granted, almost like I did Reynolds, which is probably the most dangerous thing about baseball. So what did we learn through this exercise? There's a lot more comments, but we can't possibly read them all.
Quickly, I had Reynolds on my regression list.
Okay.
And I had Roansy Contreras on my improving list because he can only improve. So, I mean, even if he does it in Double-A, he can only get better than he was doing at the end of last year.
It's true.
There's so many Reynolds. There's so many boxes you could tick on a guy going backwards a little bit, right? Contract is there. What if his wife has another baby? I mean, this guy. I mean, we're laughing about it, but the fear is real. It's real.
I know his mother-in-law very well, and like she knows that I'm busting his balls, so it's fine. Everybody, don't get
literally.
The fear is real.
Yeah.
So a guy who's done a lot, and if they don't get like we were talking about protection, if O'Neil Cruz turns into a 210 hitter who hits a few home runs now and again, and there's nobody to hit behind him, there's a lot of variables in a guy like him as being like the only sort of really good contact hitter on the team and good, really professional hitter on the team. Sometimes there's just, I just think there's a possibility there that he can go down. It doesn't mean I don't think he is. Listen, this was a hard thing for you to send to me because I have a lot of positivity about a lot of young guys. This is
but that's what I like to do though.
Players. I think they're all going to hit? No, but they are all going to get better. I think at least somewhat better. It just depends on whether or not that translates into the majors.
I think this exercise is good because it forces you to try to critically look at things that you're not looking at. When you look at the roster, I think you can tend to get lost in your hope and you get starry eyes. I start looking at the roster and I think of the potential. I go through it in my head and I go, I think Jack could hit 30 home runs. I do. I've seen Brian Reynolds hit almost 30 home runs. I think that can happen. Boy, if Hayes hits like he did last year, that's 25. O'Neil Cruz could probably hit 30. he could probably even hit 40. Man. And then I start going, you know what I mean? You start getting to the point where you're like, this lineup's going to hit 413 home runs this year. Well, that's not going to happen. So, like,
No.
I like to look at the downside of things too. Like, just if I see there's some places where things could kind of slip back a little bit, it's better to see it now and just understand it and kind of embrace it and talk yourself into being okay with them upgrading even some of your friends and jerseys you've bought and people that you like. I think that's going to happen.
You know, it's interesting, like, as we sit here, what would have been a good exercise to do is, like, say a name and force someone to put them on the less or more. You know, like Reynolds, right? Like, as Dave sat here and said those things, I actually would put him on the more list more than I would the less list. I think he's going to be 29.
Yeah, we just did the same thing about Hayes.
Prime age. I think it's the best lineup he's going to have hit in his career. I think he's been amazingly consistent. Now, maybe that consistency hasn't been good enough for some people. But so, like, that would have been a really cool exercise to say, okay, here's the name. You have to put him in one and why. So we'll do that another time.
Well, here's what I took away from this mostly. I took away from it that for the first time since probably 2015, I looked at this roster and I don't see anybody I would jettison into the sun. I don't see anybody that I would just boot off this roster and be done with.
Nope.
I think there's more to see from everybody, or at least enough promise that there's questions there that maybe Rowdy Tellez. But I would need another first baseman. You know what I mean? But
there's no more Kai Toms on this team. There's no more.
There's no Van Meters. The Yankees
Van
got
Meters,
him.
right? Yeah.
The Yankees got him. So
yeah, Alika Williams is somebody that probably you could have that conversation about. But but he's a good fielder. Rowdy to me is a guy I don't know that makes a lot of sense. But would someone be giving him a chance this year? Absolutely. So
yeah,
those are the names that stick out to me. The pitchers are where it sticks out to me a little bit even more. There were guys that you would just see them cycling through before even have on the 40-man. You're just like, no, why? What are we doing?
Well, I think there's a reason that the pitchers didn't come up much in this conversation.
I was just going to bring that up.
What are you going to do? What do you you got Keller could regress, and then everybody else you're just going to see for the first time, really.
Isn't it?
When you asked what we learned from this, I was going to say I don't know what we learned, but I do know we just talked about the Pirates for an hour and barely mentioned any pitching. I mean, we hardly talked about any starting pitching at all. So what does that say?
I think our only
there's a little stability now.
Our only Hall of Fame pitcher is Babe Adams. So I mean, like we've been pretty bad at pitching for a long time, I would say.
Well,
no disrespect meant, Mr. Blass, none. But
it's interesting. Nobody had Keller on anything. I don't know that I saw his name pop up much at all.
I think I saw his name on there as a regression somewhere. I just didn't read it. But
yeah. Again,
I mean,
it would
make sense because it's not as though he hasn't done that.
Yeah.
Another guy that you say, okay, here's his name, less or more. What are you going to do with him?
I'll tell you what. If Keller does regress this year, it ain't going to be pretty.
Oh boy,
no.
Yeah,
it ain't going to be pretty. And you know what? If he does, somebody like me will still be saying they need to extend him because the talent's in there and you got to lock in somebody. I don't care if it's like even the fourth or fifth starter. The more consistency you can bake in there, the easier it's going to be to maintain something.
And I will say, as we get closer to the season and nothing's done there, if he has a really, really good year, man, he's not going to be in a situation where he has to take any kind of a deal for anything.
No, but can I say like one thing about that? We've said that every year. And Hayes, once the season started, signed. Reynolds, once the season started, signed. Like, I'm not going to panic about it all spring because I think that's their pattern. So
it is.
I'm going to let that pattern play.
Starting pitching.
A lot of teams are circling on Keller. A lot of teams out there are waiting for his availability.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm sure his agent has told him that as well. So,
Yep. Good
anyways,
stuff,
we should
guys.
probably wrap up the show. This was fun. I'm glad we did this. Dave, thanks
Good
for
topic.
joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And if you like the Curse of Oak Island on the History Channel, Dave hosts a great podcast called why don't you tell everybody? Sir?
Digging Oak Island.
There you go. And that's also his handle on Facebook. So you can go and tell him how awesome his show is and things that you think about the Curse of Oak Island on the History Channel, which I've got my partner here down a rabbit hole on as well. And
yeah, geography first because I thought it was Oak Island in North Carolina. Turns out it's not.
yep.
And but yeah, it's an interesting story, and I don't need any more obsessions in my life.
Yeah.
So
No, neither do I. I've had this one for a while, though.
So great stuff, everybody. Good show. We're going to end it and look for an announcement pretty soon. Next week, I think we have a pretty big guest. So without further ado, let's pass it off to the man that counts.
Let's go, Bucks!
Yeah, buddy. Good stuff.